Hello, I am Suzanne Hilser-Wells, President of GG&A, and I am delighted to welcome you to the latest edition of our Thought Leadership Series. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them via the Q&A button at the top or bottom of your screen. We won't have time to answer them today, but we will post answers on our website in the days ahead. I am joined today by Liz Fitzgerald, Director of Development at ACLU, where she has been for almost 13 years. In her current role, she oversees donor acquisition, annual giving, including major gifts and development operations. Liz has over 25 years of experience in fundraising, a career which began at Emily's List in Washington, D.C. Liz and I worked together at Cancer Care in New York City, where her thoughtful approach to donor relations and individual giving helped transform those programs. It is a real pleasure to welcome my friend and former colleague, Liz Fitzgerald, here today. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks, Suzanne. Excited to be here with you today.
Could you start out by telling our listeners a little bit about the program you oversee at ACLU?
Sure. So my part of the program it really kind of falls into two buckets. I oversee what we call our supporter marketing program, and that is all of the direct marketing that the ACLU does. So we have low dollar and mid-level direct marketing. We also have major gifts marketing. So we are actively mailing and marketing to donors who give up to $100,000 to the organization if they don't have an independent relationship with the solicitor. The other part of the program is really what I think of as the scaffolding and the backbone of what we do. So it's our data, our systems, our revenue operations, our donor relations, and then also for us, since we are a federated organization, I work in the national headquarters for the ACLU, but we have 53 offices across the country. Our goal is to really be one united fundraising operation. And so we have a group called our Nationwide Development Resources, and their role is really how we create a model that brings us together as one effective functioning unit that shares donors, information, and revenue across the country.
I think we can probably do 3 hours just on that last piece.
Yeah, easily, yes.
So how big is the team that you oversee at ACLU?
Right now, that team is about 45 people total.
Oh, great. And in that sort of federated model and that leadership team that you talked about, just because I'm sure we'll get questions about this, how frequently do you all get together as a leadership team to kind of identify and figure out strategy for managing that?
In terms of bringing our affiliates in the national office together, yeah. Well, in the pre-COVID times, we used to have annual meetings where we would bring together different cohorts of our affiliate partners, largely based on similarities, whether it's kind of depending on what was going on at the time. So there's for us, given the nature of our work, red state, blue state, there's also big affiliates, small affiliates, and sort of how big their development office might be. And so we'd come together at least once a year, and often twice a year, to actually sit down and talk strategy. Now that we have this unit, which is relatively new, it really happened, I think, in the past 2 years that we pulled this together. Given this team and their dedication to that work, they're having those conversations. We're actually doing portfolio management through this team and having conversations really on a regular basis, and we've really learned how to use the tools of things like Microsoft Teams and other things to be able to have more effective communication on a regular basis.
That's great. So you all have done such a fantastic job of responding to events that offered opportunity for donor engagement, both during the pandemic and throughout the previous administration. How do you balance your strategic vision for the program with that ability to be opportunistic?
We're still figuring that out, I think is fair to say. But unfortunately, I think we had a lot of opportunities to practice over the past few years. So I think, when I think about this, I think it breaks down into two kind of moments in this. One is in the moment that you're in, when you're faced with a situation, an opportunity. It kind of depends on what kind of nonprofit you're in. And then there's the longer term planning. So in the moment, I think the most important thing is the hardest thing to do, which is to take a step back. And I'm not talking, we're all nonprofit professionals. We know that taking a step back can be weeks and months. I'm not even talking about hours. I'm talking about giving yourself the space to kind of run through a checklist to make sure that this moment is true and authentic to your organization. I think this is where something that we've learned over time, because it's part of the long-term relationship that you're building with donors. If you go out every time something happens, people are going to start to kind of becomes like, the boy who cried wolf. It's about ensuring that not only your organization is relevant to this moment, but then if somebody invests in you and your work at that moment, that you're able to report back and say, here's the tangible difference that we made. This is incredibly hard to do because, as I'm sure many people on the calls, you, Suzanne, have experienced, you're getting the calls, the texts, the emails. They're like, I've gotten 16 emails from all of our partner organizations. They all got out before us. How are we going to do this? So it's taking that step back. Within that, it's the first and foremost is checking in with yourself and your team. I think, our fundraising teams, our success is largely based on our people. And it's always about remembering, particularly in the field that I'm in, a lot of the moments come out of tragedy or something big happening, a national event. Who on the team is in a place where they're able to respond? Some people, may have a personal impact. It may have something beyond that. So kind of looking around, what are the resources that I have? Who's able to come in today, and who do I want to give them the space to step away and make that okay? The second part of it is then, I think, that your clients and organization, how does this impact us? And can I truly tell a story that makes sense and is going to seem authentic to this organization and doesn't feel like mission creep, or I'm trying to just take advantage of a moment, because that's where it starts to just look like fundraising for the sake of kind of grabbing money. And then the third, which is a really important one, and I think we all saw last year, is what are the channels that are available to me to communicate? The pandemic was a great example of this, because suddenly I'm not going to mail somebody when the US Postal Service is falling apart. We do a lot of canvassing on the street. We had to pull all our canvassers off the street. We can't do face-to-face fundraising. Call centers all went down because there's no such thing as social distancing in a call center. So what are the tools that we have so that if we're asking, we can be responsive to donors and not kind of have gifts or whatever end up in a black hole. And then I think it's also about, how is this impacting your supporters? And in that way, it's looking at whether, basically how you're going to frame an ask. Is it going to be, I'm going to give you information, I'm going to put a soft ask at the bottom of an email and in a footer, or is it that I'm going to be able to make a direct ask? So I think it's figuring out kind of where people's heads are at that moment. So I think it's about kind of how you stay true to who you are as an organization in a big moment. For the longer term, I think what we saw, what I think a lot of people see, is people will come back and say, oh, that was a fluke, there was a big moment, we got an influx of money, it'll never repeat itself. I think there's two really important things. One is kind of claim your space in that moment. Those things, yes, big national things happen, and people feel the desire to give. They come to you though, because they know you. You've sent acquisition mail before. Your website is set up in a way that makes it easy to make a gift. You have got talking points to your donor services team in a timely way. So when people start calling in, they're able to speak to the moment. So it's all about all of that prep work that we all do every day. So I think it's really important to be sure to kind of make sure that people understand that this is about what you did, because we all know there's probably 10 other organizations who do similar work who could claim their space here. And so how have you set yourself up for success? The other part about that then, I think, is also pushing yourself and the fundraising team, because I think it's equally as easy to say on the fundraising side, that was a fluke, we're not going to retain any of those donors, they're all going to go out the other side. Yeah, your numbers are probably not going to be the same, but you should try. And I think it's about going back to kind of your strategic plan. If your retention rate is 30%, try, like do everything you can to get to that. Set expectations, but don't assume that everybody's going to walk away. And, you know, think about acquisition. Sometimes it can be hard in those big moments to lose money on acquisition, but you want to try to push it as far as you possibly can, because if this is your moment to get people, go and get it. So pushing acquisition, making sure you're aiming for retention as high as you can possibly get, that you're testing and risk taking. This is also a time when people tend to get conservative because they're like, this is changing, things are I don't know how people are going to respond, but I would say kind of look at it as the opportunity, because you probably have more money and you have a little more opportunity to go out there. And so testing different messages, testing different techniques, different channels, to see how you can really take this moment to expand the reach of your fundraising program overall.
That's really interesting. So let me ask you a follow-up question about the impact reporting part of it. So when a big event happens and you think, okay, we're getting this influx of money, do you in that moment say, how will we think about impact? Or do you set a meeting to talk about that? Because I feel like, I'm so glad you brought it up. I think that's sometimes something that gets lost because then the next thing happens. So how do we make sure we build into our enterprise the habit of actually reporting back about impact?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's something we struggled with for a long time until we took what now seems like the most obvious path, which was to create something called, quite literally, the impact report that we send out, which I think a lot of organizations now have, of getting in the habit. I think we send it out quarterly at this point, and we have different versions for different levels of engagement with the organization, but it is specifically designed to do that and to say, you made these investments. These are the kind of what we do when we're building it out every month or every quarter is, we know these were the kind of top issues that donors were responding to over the last quarter. We're going to put it in here. We're going to explain what we did. In our case, what cases did we file? What what was the litigation? What was the activism? And so that we're always having that report back. We also feed it into, and this is something we actually did at Cancer Care all those years ago. We had a newsletter insert that we put into acknowledgements that did a similar kind of thing. And so we just built it into our regular cultivation tools to always be doing that, so that, yeah, in some ways it's like, you don't have to stop and think in the moment, like, we're really going to have to go back to these people. It is built into the schedule. What we did find when there was a huge moment that was really kind of taking the organization to another level, or another level of press coverage or whatever is kind of fits for the different organizations, we would do something that was very targeted about that specific issue for particularly the higher end of the file. Usually there's a blog post, quite honestly, that somebody's written, or something that's been written for a very big donor to the organization. And we would usually take that material and not try to, recreate it, not try to create something on our own, and turn it into a one-pager that we would send out to people as just we didn't want to wait and we wanted to let you know this. But if nothing else, we knew that we had that regular cadence within our conversation with donors.
And Elizabeth, I think you just touched on something really important. The important thing isn't about getting bespoke to each specific audience. It's really just making sure that you have a habit of reporting on your impact. So, and frankly, maybe somebody gave in response to one event, but the other, chances are excellent, right? They care about the other top things. So I think that's a lesson I hope people take away from this. Everything doesn't have to be a personal impact report. We can talk about the impact the organization is having.
Yeah, and I think what we've found is that regularly, and this kind of goes to research, but also it's very rarely what you think it is that kind of got people to give. Like it's, we had this with certain situations, and I think a lot of times we tend to look at things kind of through our organizational perspective and how we're set up. So for instance, for us, we had a big moment when the travel ban was signed in the Trump administration. For us, organizationally, that's our Immigrants' Rights Project. So we were like, oh, we got to go back and tell everybody about what the Immigrants' Rights Project is. That is not why people gave to this. They were giving because of a frustration over an action that was taken that they didn't agree with. And this was a way of people sort of making a statement about that. So it could have been 18 different things, but this was the moment. And so, at first we did a lot of like, let's report back on that, and people were not responding to it at all. And when we took people out to the bigger narrative of this is the work that we're doing overall, people were far more responsive to that. And it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to tailor small chains of communication.
Yeah. And that's really interesting too, right? That people were taking their kind of an overarching interest or concern, and they were given a very specific thing to respond to. It didn't mean that immigration reform is their core issue, to your point. I think about that sometimes with back at Cancer Care, the executive director, when a famous person, and this was so surprising to me the first time I think we were both there, and she called us into her office because a famous person had been diagnosed with cancer, and she said, we're going to get a lot of gifts and inquiries, and we were both like, what? This is
about.
But I mean, of course she was right. That people, it just raises the consciousness. It reminds people about their values. What are the things they want to invest in? And so I think that's a really important lesson too, to remember, and sometimes it's going back and asking those folks, you responded because of this, what was your actual motivator? And so some tools like surveys to those one-time or infrequent donors can be super helpful. So can you share some of the other lessons you and your colleagues learned that you're going to apply to fundraising going forward?
Sure. I mean, one of the big ones that we learned, and kind of related to what you were just saying, is about those new donors that you bring in. I think unlike when we're in a more traditional fundraising cycle where it largely donor names come from existing donor lists and we're going out to sort of the same pool of people. In a particularly big moment, you often get people who have never made a gift before as a way of taking action on something. And that's what we found. And I think what we learned is that reminder that in philanthropy, in the work that we do, we train people how to give, right? That's what direct marketing really does. It's like, there's an annual renewal, for the ACLU, there's an annual renewal. I expect you to give to me every year. I expect you to give me at this level. I expect you to upgrade over time. Like, we really kind of teach people how to give. When you get brand new donors, what we found, we got what felt like a huge amount of pushback of like, oh my God, why are you asking me again? Why are you doing this? I think what's super important in that moment is data instead of anecdotes, because your donor services people are going to be like, everybody in the world called us and nobody likes what we're doing, because, so making sure that we're getting real data, because proportionately, if your list grew, you're going to get more complaints. It's just normal. But also figuring out then, how do you tweak your program to work for people who are not as accustomed to this kind of treatment? And I think it's important because the instinct is pull back, don't stop mailing them, stop talking to them, or we have to do something totally different for this group. They're completely different. If you're huge enough to be able to handle that kind of segmentation on your file and that kind of different communication, great. What we found was instead was taking our normal schedule and pulling it back. So if we send 11 renewal notices, maybe they got every other one, or, different things, so that it was manageable within a very big program that is kind of a machine and works in a certain way. And then watching and making sure, are we retaining, are we able to do it?
You changed the schedule. You didn't change the mailings necessarily.
Nope.
Yep. Yeah, that's an important one too, right? Yeah. You don't have to create, again, this whole bespoke program.
Yeah, and it's also because you've got to think about again, going kind of back to that strategic plan. It's your long-term stability. Can I do that forever, if that's the kind of pattern that I start with? I think the other thing for us, and something that we're doing now in a big way, is internal education. It's a piece that I think was in some ways the bigger surprise, but particularly for organizations that have gone through a big moment, you're probably going to have a lot of new faces at the table internally. So either in your executive office, in your finance office, and all of those people may not understand, one, kind of what normal looks like for your organization, and two, even what your fundraising model is. So for us, we're kind of a very traditional, direct marketing, telemarketing, all of those different channels. We had finance staff who came in and had never seen a year where we lost money on acquisition, which was, for us, we're like, that's a fantasy. And we've been telling them this all along. We're like, we're doing something wrong. We should be losing money. This is not what happens.
Yeah.
Then when we kindly come in and say like, okay, here's the budget and I'm going to lose money on acquisition, it's like, we didn't plan for that. Like they're living in a very different world and understanding. And for us, even I'd say in particularly in the last year where we brought in a lot of new donors, I think as a fundraisers in many ways, that's a huge red flag, because I can only count on getting, 25% of those people back.
Mhm.
So if you want me to even raise what I did last year, I've now got to fill a huge gap. And so I had, analytics coming in with like, oh, growth projections we go over. I was like, growth is, if we hit this number again, we'd be super lucky. So really what right now we're in this whole project of even explaining, like, if we didn't mail anybody, because that's always the first thing people want to do because it's expensive. If we didn't mail anybody, what would happen to the file? If we never did this again, what would happen to the file? So that we're really laying it out for people, having the conversation, having just incredible transparency in the program, so that we're informing people, but then we can also make decisions collaboratively, and it doesn't turn into just the annual budget fight of, no, I promise you I need this money and I will spend it well. It's like, no, if we do this and you want to cut this acquisition budget in half, here's what's going to happen in 5 years. And really having that conversation between us. I think that's our biggest area of work right now. And I think is one of the things that it is incredibly important, particularly in a moment like this.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Liz. That was super helpful. And because we know that, Giving USA data told us that lots of people have experienced just what you described, lots of new donors to their organization. I'm gonna recap the 3 really big things that you just said for folks. First of all, making data-driven decisions, right? Really looking at the data, understanding that you may need to tailor your communications and your outreach to these new donors, but do not create a bespoke program, because then you'll be stuck with it forever. Part of what you're doing is training them and also figuring out who might be a long-term donor for you and get the data. And then finally, having realistic expectations about budgeting and projections with internal audiences now, because it's a lot easier for you to explain what's going to happen over 3 years than 3 years from now when they're like, where are all these people?
Exactly.
So, I think those are all 3 incredibly important. And I love what you said earlier about, you had this moment where you had this influx of cash to do some of your programs, but also to invest back. So what might you do in order to build your long-term sustainability, which I think is really important. And folks may not be thinking about that either. I mean, you mentioned a 30% renewal rate for the kind of program you have is very high, but you're right. A finance person who's coming from a very different kind of nonprofit, that might seem, crazy low.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's aspirational for your new donor.
Yeah, exactly. For us, we'd be like, wow, we would be wildly successful if we hit that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's all really helpful. And I think appreciating the moment, taking advantage of the moment, but also setting realistic expectations for what of the moment is sustainable is really, really important. So what's next for your program?
I would say the biggest things for us are, for us, it's about 2 things. Is what is the new normal? Particularly when you've gone through moments like this, is there's resetting, but we never want to go back to where we were. So what is sustainable and what is reasonable? And then I think it's also what is sustainable and reasonable for the staff is the big thing that we are all in. We have a constant question, because for us, it's been the past 4 to 5 years have been a constant, very high pace, which leads to incredible burnout. How do we ratchet it down and know kind of how to modulate the work, and where we are going to take opportunities, where we're going to step back from them, and how we kind of integrate all of what happened into our day-to-day.
Yeah, yep. That's a really important one, and I know one that all organizations that we work with are spending a lot of time thinking about, coming out of this time that's been really personally and professionally challenging for folks. How do you support people, but still take advantage of kind of this moment of optimism and growth for a lot of institutions?
Exactly.
Liz, thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course.
You shared a lot of really great information. I want to thank Liz and our GG&A team that produces these webinars, and to all of you for joining us here today. If you have questions, please, again, you can send them to us on our website or via the Q&A button at the bottom or top of your screen. I also invite everybody on this call to connect with me and with Liz and with GG&A on LinkedIn. And if you would like to talk to us about any of the issues that were raised here today, please reach out to us via our website. Thanks again, Liz.
Excellent. Thanks, Suzanne.
Bye-bye.
Bye.